So let's take a look at the motherboard itself. I think it's pretty obvious where the name Steel Legend comes from with all these steel / metal accents. I'm not exactly sure it's steel because I think if it's steel quite a bit heavier than this, but it doesn't matter. I think it looks excellent with this kind of grayscale look. You should have no problems matching this with most things in terms of color, in terms of the whole look of your rig. It's a pretty nice looking motherboard. I personally think it looks really, really nice. But that's not the most important thing on a motherboard. I think the most important thing on a motherboard is definitely compatibility and connectivity. So obviously it's compatible with your Intel CPUs. It's an LGA 1200 motherboard, so it supports your 10th and 11th gen Intel CPUs. Is that a really good thing? I really don't know. I don't really think so. The 11th and 10th gen CPUs aren't that phenomenal, and they run pretty hot, so I don't know why anyone would buy an Intel chip at this point in time. But hey, maybe you got a good deal on an i5 or something. I wouldn't know. But let's take a look at the connectivity. So starting with the PCIe slots, we've got 116X PCIe Gen 4 slot to X4 PCIe Gen 3 slots, and in terms of M.2 NVMe SSD support, we've got one Hyper M.2, which is under this kind of metal heatsink thing. It's a PCIe Gen 4 NVMe SSD slot, as well as the other Ultra M.2, which is actually just a PCIe Gen 3 NVMe SSD slot. But frankly, Gen 3 is really fast enough for literally everyone, so I don't see the point in going PCIe Gen 4 unless you're running an operation that really needs the fastest SSD you can get your hands on. Now, each of these SSD slots, I think, are X4 in terms of their PCIe bandwidth each, which is nice. And you also got this kind of a mini M.2 Wi-Fi port, which is for you to basically slot in a short and tiny M.2 based Wi-Fi card if you want Wi-Fi on this motherboard without using the 4X PCIe slots. So that is definitely appreciated. In terms of SATA and hard drive compatibility, we've got 4 SATA 3 slots facing the right and 2 SATA 3 ports facing up, so you can arrange it however you like depending on your build and your specifications, and I think the layout is pretty standard. In terms of fan connectivity, we've got a total of 5 fan connectors, 2 in the top right, 2 in the bottom left, and 1 near kind of the I/O area, and I think this one was probably the one that they intend you to use with your CPU coolers and all that stuff, because it's the nearest to the CPU socket. In terms of RAM support, it supports up to 2933 MHz DDR4 RAM, I think up to 64 gigabytes. That's not really decided, frankly, by Asrock. This is something that's decided by Intel, so it is what it is. And this motherboard does have RGB on the right side. Now, I don't have a test bench to really set it up and show you guys because I'm a very small channel, so if you want to change that, make sure you subscribe, like, and support my videos, so in the future I can get like a test bench and show you motherboards in full operating mode. But it does have RGB down the side, and it's got the Steel Legend logo. Continuing on with connectivity, we have USB 3, USB 2, everything you expect, your front panel connectors, and you also have got some ports for you to plug in your LED RGB controllers. So if you want to control the RGB in the rest of your case through your strips or your fans, you can do that through the motherboard, which is nice. In terms of build quality, this motherboard is pretty impressive. As I said, you've got that nice steel armor and heatsink thing going on, which looks really nice, but the motherboard itself is reasonably rigid and feels pretty well built, as I expect most motherboards to be nowadays. And one really nice feature is that the PCIe X16 GPU slot is pretty much reinforced with some metal so that GPU sag can be minimized. How effective this is actually, I'm not too sure, but I think it definitely looks nice. However, one more thing about its design, I feel that the Steel Legend logo looks very similar and it looks like a dictatorship's logo, you know, that is a fascist regime logo, something from, you know, The Man in the High Castle or something. I'm not saying that Asrock is an evil company, but that logo, while it's supposed to, I guess, look like Superman's logo, looks really with its sharp edges and harsh corners, looks very suspiciously fascist. Oh, not to make anything political, but it does look suspiciously like that. Now moving on to the next thing, and that is a VRM. So this has that 10-phase Dr. Morse power design VRM that they're kind of advertising, which is whatever, I guess. But you know, apparently online, people who know way more than me about capacitors and stuff have said that B560M Steel Legend has reasonably good DRMs. They actually have pretty decent DRMs, especially for its price range. It's actually really nice, so that's good to know, and that is awesome, I guess. And Since you won't be overclocking on this motherboard because it is a B series chipset, not a Z series chipset, you won't be overclocking. VRMs won't be too important, so having just reasonably decent ones are good enough, and this one has just that, so you have no worries even if you put a hot i7 CPU in here. Now let's move on to the next really important thing with your motherboard, and that is I/O on the back. Now that's where it kind of falls short a little bit, maybe because it's limited in terms of PCIe lanes and bandwidth because it's an Intel chip, but it's kind of limiting. Sure, there is the excellent Dragon 2.5 gigabit connector, which is great for you if you want to use this motherboard for a NAS or a server, which is really nice. And you do get 4 USB 3.0 ports. Well, it's called USB 3.2 Gen 1, but it's basically just 3.0. And you've got 2 USB 2 ports and a PS2 port. Now, the USB 2 is excellent, and PS2 is excellent for kind of backwards compatibility. It's excellent for driverless support, but it kind of takes up space, and I wish there were more USB 3 ports. That's really all I wish for, because I am a power user and I always deal with a lot of fast transfers of data, so I need a lot of USB 3 support. It does have HDMI and DisplayPort if you use Intel integrated graphics, but if you're using Intel integrated graphics, you probably won't be spending this much on the motherboard, and it's probably a good idea to get something much cheaper in your motherboard, or maybe get a GPU, because Intel integrated graphics, it's terrible. You also get your optical audio out and your aux out, and all around that's good. So in conclusion then, is the B560M Steel Legend a good motherboard? I personally think, for my initial impressions, it looks pretty good. From what I've done in terms of research and what I've read up about this motherboard in terms of its VRMs, it should do a pretty good job for most Intel builds. But then that leads to the question, why would you be building an Intel PC in this year? Well, the answer is simple: shortages. I can see someone building an Intel chip-based kind of PC right now if they really want a PC, they really want a game, but they just can't get their hands on an AMD chip, because let's be honest, AMD is destroying everyone in value. But then there's also the problem of scalpers, there's also the problem of being able to even get your hands on AMD chips in the first place, so that makes sense. Like, some people might want to build an Intel chip right now, and if you're building an Intel based PC, I wouldn't suggest you spend too much until the shortage is fixed. And because of that, you know, buying a mid-range or cheaper Intel system might actually make sense in a pinch. So yeah, the B560M Steel Legend, pretty decent. Thank you to Tech Dynamic for sending it over just for me to check it out. It's always fun to mess with gear and new tech and stuff. It's not super impressive, but it's not supposed to be, so it absolutely does what it promises to. No more, no less, and I honestly think it's a really good motherboard for NAS and server builds because of that 2.5 gigabit Dragon port it has on the I/O that comes with it. It means you save money, you don't have to actually put any sort of networking card in there, and from the get-go you've got something fast and snappy to start off with. Anyway, I'm going to end this video here. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it or found it helpful, make sure you like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video, which is like, I don't know when. But till then, please support this channel so I can continue doing awesome stuff like this. People will continue sending me stuff like this. And I'll see you guys next time, which is like, whenever. Goodbye.